Have you ever closed your eyes, lost yourself in an amazing piece of music, and just marveled at the solitary genius who must have pulled those notes straight down from the heavens? It's a really beautiful, romanticized idea that art just descends upon us as pure, divine inspiration. Well, welcome to today's Explainer. We're actually going to take that romantic idea, set it to the side for a minute, and dive right into the messy, highly negotiated, and honestly incredibly fascinating marketplace of music. We are going to uncover the hidden forces that actually shape exactly what we hear. So I want you to ask yourself, is your absolutely favorite track a completely autonomous expression of an artist's soul? Or is it a product that's been heavily molded by industry, business, and technology? Now, it's super easy to ignore the business side of things, mostly because it can feel, a bit clinical. But to truly understand music, we really have to look under the hood at the machinery behind it. And that brings us right to our core concept for today, which is industrial mediation. What is that? Well, it's basically the process where intermediaries, we're talking producers, sound engineers, marketing teams, radio programmers, and even the physical formats themselves, negotiate and shape the creation and consumption of cultural artifacts. Basically, they're invisible hands molding the music long before it ever actually reaches your ears.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with Part 1, the myth of pure music. Then move to Part 2, Jazz, Commerce, and GRP Records, and explore Part 3, Jazz Fusion and Selling Out. After that, we'll switch gears entirely to look at the physical format for Part 4, the golden age of CDs, and finally wrap up with Part 5, the CD's digital demise. Two lenses, genre and format, to reveal exactly how this works.
Let's get right into Section 1, the myth of pure music.
Historically, the official canon of jazz has almost always been written as this timeline of pure, solitary genius, and it deliberately ignores the business aspects that actually drove the music. But the reality is way different. Far from being this untouched art form, jazz has literally always morphed to survive commercial realities. Just look at the timeline. In the 1930s, big band swing was completely dominant, and it pandered directly to the mass market. Then, in the 40s, we see the rise of bebop, which was kind of an experimental reaction to that. Fast forward to the 1960s, jazz sales were becoming really unprofitable, so the industry pushed hard for jazz rock, crossing over to rock audiences by using amplified instruments. And then by the 1980s, we get contemporary or smooth jazz, heavily influenced by R&B and perfectly tailored for the radio. The really crucial point here is that the evolution of jazz is just as much a story of economic survival and industry adaptation as it is about pure musical genius.
Moving on to Section 2, Jazz, Commerce, and GRP Records.
If you really want to see industrial mediation in action, you have to look at GRP Records. Founded in the 80s by Dave Grusin and Larry Rosen, they achieved massive success through this highly polished digital sound. How'd they do it? Well, through 4 specific gatekeepers. First up, producers. They shaped the arrangements to ensure pop appeal and picked melodies they knew would sell. Second, you have the engineers. They were applying cutting-edge digital recording technologies to create a very specific, pristine sound profile. Third, marketers. They were analyzing data to construct the ideal consumer and basically sell a cohesive brand identity. And finally, radio programmers. These folks literally dictated what notes and styles fit into their highly lucrative smooth jazz broadcast formats. So the artists aren't just playing in a vacuum, right? They're collaborating with and being actively guided by an entire assembly line of industry professionals. Which brings us to Section 3, Jazz Fusion and Selling Out. Now, as you might expect, this overt embrace of commerce caused a massive, fiery backlash from jazz purists. The acclaimed jazz guitarist Pat Metheny famously described the work of smooth jazz superstar Kenny G as, and I quote, musical necrophilia. Wow. This was specifically after Kenny G overdubbed himself onto a classic Louis Armstrong track, and traditionalists were just absolutely horrified by this. They viewed commercial success and the smoothing out of jazz's rough edges as a total artistic portrayal. They called it garbage and elevator music that was totally devoid of the soul and improvisation that originally defined true jazz. The drama and the vitriol here were incredibly intense.
So it really leaves us with this fascinating split reality. On one side, you have the purist myth. This is the somewhat elitist view of jazz as an unmediated, autonomous art driven purely by genius. But then, on the other side, you have the fusion reality, acknowledging that jazz is a negotiated product that intersects with pop and capitalism to reach millions of people. I mean, artists like Kenny G and George Benson sold millions of records not by ignoring the industry, but by completely mastering its framework.
It's a stark reminder for us that what we consider authentic is often highly subjective, and it completely overlooks the historical realities of how music is actually produced.
Let's shift gears now for Section 4, the golden age of CDs. Because remember, industrial mediation isn't just about the people in a recording studio, it's also about the technology. The physical carrier itself actually shapes the sound. When the CD was first commercially introduced around 1982, it was pushed as this elite premium format. Record labels gathered up all these classic vinyl archives and packaged them into these pristine, heavy, library-like box sets aimed squarely at audiophiles. It was presented as pure, noiseless perfection, and it completely mediated and changed how we actually experienced audio.
But the way we actually ended up using the CD changed absolutely everything. The vinyl LP ideal was very home-based, right? You're staring at large cover art in your living room, having this deep, contemplative experience. But the CD reality became highly mobile. We threw them in our cars, our Sony Discmans, our laptops. The music became completely detached from its visual packaging, its booklets, its art, the whole shebang. The physical lightness of the CD completely altered our habits, detaching the music from the visual context that originally gave it so much of its meaning.
And that leads us to Section 5, the CD's digital demise.
You see, the very portability that made the CD so popular ultimately became its downfall. We all took CDs out of their jewel cases and just shoved them into those big zipper binders for our car visors. Academics actually call those discarded booklets and covers paratexts, basically the things meant to give the object cultural value. Stripped of those paratexts, the CD was no longer treated like a piece of art. It was just a naked utilitarian tool.
The theorist John Corbett captured this dynamic perfectly. He said, "The compact disc renders the musical object invisible and untouchable." And think about it for a second. With a record player, you physically see the needle in the groove. You literally see the music happening. But a CD player, it just swallows the disc into a metallic box. By eliminating that surface noise and hiding the disc away, the CD lost that fetishistic material presence of vinyl. It basically became an abstract, invisible carrier.
And ironically, the death of the CD wasn't signaled by it becoming some rare, sought-after artifact. No, it was signaled by sheer ubiquitousness. They were absolutely everywhere. They were being given away in newspapers, stacked precariously in gas stations, overflowing in secondhand shops. They lost all perceived values simply because they were just too common and way too separated from the cultural weight they once carried.
Which leads us to its final fascinating mutation. By the mid-2000s, street vendors in places like Mexico City actually stopped selling pirated albums with copied artwork. Instead, they just burned dozens of compressed MP3 files onto blank CDRs. So the disc was no longer an album in the traditional sense. It was merely a temporary bucket, carrying data from a computer to a playback machine, just keeping the music warm until the internet got fast enough to make the physical disc entirely obsolete.
So, we've journeyed all the way from the boardrooms of smooth jazz to the street markets of Mexico City. Now I want you to look at your own music library. Is your absolute favorite, pure underground track actually just the product of invisible industrial mediation? Have the formats, the marketers, and the engineers been quietly shaping your tastes this whole time? It definitely leaves us wondering if truly unmediated art even exists at all. Thanks so much for exploring this with me on today's Explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.